you've been referred to for an ethics violation, supposedly. I don't know what it is. Do you care to comment on that?
Ethics? They don't have that.
No, again, I think it just shows how political this committee. Again, we've caught this committee, Jason. We've caught them in several lies, 8 different lies, 2 of them about me. Here's one that they did. During one of these big fancy committee hearings they do with all their audio visual, they played a clip of me doing an interview, and I said in the interview, January 6th is the ultimate date of significance in a presidential contest. The part they left out was the first sentence to that statement when I said the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said January 6th was the ultimate date of significance in a presidential contest. Because it is. It's that final.
I want to talk about 4 Republican congressmen who have now been referred by the January 6th committee to the Ethics Committee for not answering their subpoenas.
None of the subpoenaed members complied. And we are now referring 4 members of Congress for appropriate sanction by the House Ethics Committee for failure to comply with lawful subpoenas.
Those 4 Republicans the committee referred to the House Ethics Committee are notably still sitting members of Congress and will exercise real power when Republicans assume the majority starting in January. There is Scott Perry, one of the members who sought a pardon from the former president for his role in overturning the election. Andy Biggs, who currently sits on the Oversight and Judiciary Committees, who styles himself a candidate for Speaker. Jim Jordan, who's expected to become the chair of the Judiciary Committee when Republicans take control of the House next year. And Kevin McCarthy, potentially the future House Speaker if he manages to survive the Republican Hunger Games.
You know, it's always the cover-up that brings you down. Not so much the crime often in these type, Watergate-type situations. It's always the cover-up. Jim Jordan weighed in.
Look, there's malpractice on this commission on several fronts, right? Not allowing Republicans to choose who's on their committee. And everybody knows that the person in charge of security for the Capitol is ultimately the Speaker of the House. How can you not investigate that component and call yourself an investigation?
That's why Jason, that's why they didn't want to let us on the committee in the first place, because they knew we would ask these questions and get to the information we ultimately got to. Really, 2 things were going on here. Remember, there was that one message where a reporter talked about they were concerned about the optics. Well, the reason they were concerned about the optics of having National Guard presence here on January 6th is because of what happened in the summer of 2020. All the rioting going on around the country, and the Democrats seemed to support it and call it peaceful protest. So you had that element, and then you had this pattern of approval that John referenced, where it was the Speaker's office, the Sergeant of Arms office, working hand in glove all the time. And many of these meetings, they didn't even invite Republicans to. So it was a coordinated effort. And then on that day, when it was obvious you needed National Guard here, the Sergeant of Arms office had to go talk with the Speaker's office before they could take action because of this pattern of approval that had developed. So that was the real problem here. And of course, not to mention just the overall political nature of this committee for the last year and a half. Their sole focus was to go after President Trump. Again, a political committee. I think that the country sees it for what it is.
Of course, Jim Jordan's a piece of shit, so I'm sorry I wasted your time with that. But that's where we are.
What is the chatter around these 4 who will be exercising power, particularly Kevin McCarthy, given the fact that they've now been referred for ethics charges?
I think they're breathing a sigh of relief that they weren't referred for criminal contempt of Congress. I think that was the one thing that a lot of these members were worried about. But House, a referral to the House Ethics Committee isn't nothing either. Let's see what the House Ethics Committee does. They're kind of limited in what they can kind of do in terms of holding these members accountable. They could recommend a censure, or they could recommend some sort of other action in the next Congress potentially. But it does raise this kind of really interesting point about if in the Republican majority House, the chairman of the House Ethics Committee is referring the potential speaker, i.e. Kevin McCarthy or Andy Biggs, for censure, it does put the Republican Party in a really difficult position because it quite clearly makes them look like they're doing wrong and criminal activity. This was a lawfully issued subpoena, and even though they don't get referred to the Justice Department, not complying with a subpoena, as the American public knows, is technically a crime.
Well, I mean, how is this going to work at all, Kurt? I mean, you, for sort of House oversight, for instance, they didn't, this is why they're being referred, right? Because they ignored subpoenas. On House oversight, one presumes they're going to be issuing subpoenas to do all of their silly investigations of Hunter Biden or whatever, and then should people just ignore them? Because they've set the precedent to ignore them.
Yeah, I mean, this is the hypocrisy run amok here. Jim Jordan and Kevin McCarthy, they've made it no secret that their entire agenda for 2023 is to launch investigation after investigation targeting the Biden administration. I'm not entirely sure how you can issue a subpoena with any credibility when you've spent the last year ignoring congressional subpoenas, going to court suing to try to prevent even compliance with congressional subpoenas, doing everything you can to obstruct a congressional investigation. How in the world do you expect anybody to take seriously your oversight inquiries when this is how you have treated oversight ever since Donald Trump came onto the scene? We've heard this entire time them whine and complain, everything about closed-door depositions and not legitimate subpoenas and all of this belly aching, and now they want everyone to turn around and take them seriously. And I think what they are counting on, Joy, they are counting on the fact that the media won't hold them to that standard.
The reality is, a lot of these guys are going to end up going down. Much like the Republican congressman in New York that looks like he lied on his resume, somehow got elected by fraud.
This campaign was never about me. It was always about the people.
Just weeks after pulling off a midterm upset, tonight New York Republican Congressman-elect George Santos is facing mounting pressure after a bombshell report in the New York Times alleging much of his life story may be fake. College, NYU, Goldman Sachs, and Citigroup all tell NBC News they have no record of Santos, despite being listed on his campaign biography. Also, a tax-exempt animal rescue group he claims to run is not listed on the IRS website. The Times raises questions about how Santos managed to lend his campaign $700,000. The paper also reports unresolved criminal charges against Santos involving fraudulent checks in Brazil. The local GOP chair calls the allegations serious and says he looks forward to Santos's response. Democrats are now calling for a House ethics investigation.
He's a good Republican. I'm sure he'll get the nomination next time because he's their boy.